He lived in ancient Greece through much of the 4th century BCE. He met Alexander the Great, and he had a famous rivalry with the philosopher Plato. He made a name for himself because of his complete disregard for other people's opinions. He defecated in the marketplace, he urinated on people, he spat in their faces, and in one memorable story, when a famous Greek courtesan dedicated a golden statue at Delphi, he wrote on it, "From the intemperance of the Greeks." Some things never change. His name? Diogenes of Sinope, or, as he is also known, Diogenes the Cynic and Diogenes the Dog. If Socrates was the gadfly of Athens, irritating her citizens into living a virtuous life, then Diogenes was the hound, biting at their legs. That is why Plato called him a Socrates gone mad. But was Diogenes the most outrageous philosopher to ever live? Join us now as we take a look at the life and ideas of Diogenes the Cynic. As his name suggests, Diogenes was born in Sinope, but it was not there that he became a philosopher. At some point, he was involved in a scandal, probably alongside his father, in which they either defaced or debased, depending on the interpretation, the local currency. Why they did this is not entirely clear, but Diogenes himself later said that it was because he had misinterpreted a message from the all-knowing oracle at Delphi. The oracle had apparently told him to deface or debase the currency, so he did. But he later realised that the oracle had meant for him to devalue the currency of social convention, not the actual money. Oh dear, Diogenes. In any case, he was exiled from Sinope. He lost all of his possessions and he ended up living homeless on the streets of Athens. It was then, in Athens, that Diogenes became the philosopher that we know today. One day, Diogenes spotted a mouse running around. The mouse, Diogenes thought, didn't have a care in the world. It didn't fear the dark, it didn't worry about its position in life, it didn't seek fame nor fortune, it just lived naturally, a happy mouse. This experience began a shift in Diogenes' perspective. He realised that worrying about his situation was completely pointless, and he resolved to live as the mouse. That is, as nature intended. Thus, Diogenes the Cynic was born. Diogenes came to believe that true happiness could only be found if he lived according to human nature. He reasoned that all forms of cultural convention, cultural norms, cultural institutions, or whatever it happens to be, were utterly corrupt and at odds with our ability to find true happiness. A feeling, perhaps, that still resonates today. It was also around this time that Diogenes found a tutor, another philosopher known for his austere values, Antisthenes. At first, when Diogenes tried to learn from Antisthenes, the latter beat him away with his staff, but Diogenes persisted. At one point, he offered his head to Antisthenes and said, "Strike, for you'll not find wood hard enough to keep me away from you, as long as I think you have something to say." This must have impressed Antisthenes, because he agreed to take Diogenes on as his disciple. From Antisthenes, Diogenes learnt to act on his philosophy, and he learnt to be totally free of all inhibitions. Diogenes took these lessons to heart, because the rest of his life became a performance of his philosophy. A performance that revealed, often in the most outrageous ways, the depths of his cynicism. As a cynic, Diogenes looked up to the Greek hero Heracles, who was able to bear any hardship. He decided not to live in a house, but to live in an old clay wine pot by the temple of the goddess Cybele. He announced himself as a citizen of the world, and he refused to recognize any form of social status. Once, Alexander the Great met Diogenes while he was staring at a pile of bones. When Alexander asked him, "What are you doing?" Diogenes replied, "I'm searching for the bones of your father, but I cannot distinguish them from those of a slave." More on Alexander in a minute. Diogenes believed that virtue required strength in both body and mind. He rolled on hot sand so that he could bear extreme heat. He hugged snow-covered statues so that he could bear extreme cold. One day, when he saw a child drinking water from his hands, Diogenes threw away his cup, announcing that he had been outdone in frugality by a child. It is sometimes overlooked, however, that Diogenes did not reject the idea of property per se. He simply believed that he didn't need anything, because everything already belonged to the wise. That's why, when his friends asked if they should give him some money, he said no, they should give it back. Diogenes had many such ideas, but his most notorious behaviour came in the form of his philosophical pranks. These are just a few. Often, in front of everyone in the Athenian marketplace, Diogenes would perform the act of Aphrodite. In other words, he would pleasure himself in public, and when he was asked why he did this, he simply said, if only one could relieve hunger by rubbing one's belly. Famously, Diogenes would also walk around Athens in broad daylight carrying a lamp, and he would proclaim that he was looking for a man. His point seems to have been that looking for something in broad daylight with a lamp was about as useful as looking for someone in Athens with the true qualities of a man. Another time, at the shrine of Asclepius, where Athenians gave offerings for good health, Diogenes let loose a fighting cock, and it ran around, mauling everybody. He did this to mock their piety. And finally, one of his other habits was begging statues for money. Why did he do this? To practice being rejected. I might start asking statues on dates. These kinds of pranks made Diogenes a controversial, although tolerable, fixture of Athenian society. In the midst of all these antics, Diogenes also sparked a rivalry with that other philosopher, Plato. Some say that Plato was the first to name Diogenes the dog, while Diogenes seems to have thought of Plato as a pretentious hypocrite. These are a few of their encounters. Once, when Plato was giving a talk on his famous theory of forms, the basic idea being that perfect universal entities exist independently of perceptible objects in the world, Diogenes exclaimed, "But Plato, I can see tables and I can see cups, but I cannot see perfect tablehood nor cuphood." To this, Plato replied, "Diogenes, that's because you have the eyes to see the table and the cup, but you do not have the mind to comprehend universal entities." On this occasion, Plato seems to have gotten the upper hand. Another time, famously, Plato defined man as an animal with 2 legs and no feathers. Shortly after this, Diogenes arrived carrying a featherless chicken, and he announced, "Here is Plato's man." And finally, Diogenes enjoyed pointing out Plato's hypocrisy. When Diogenes was once criticized for begging, when Plato does not, he replied that Plato also begs, but only when no one is listening. Here, Diogenes was alluding to the gifts that Plato allegedly received from Dionysius II, tyrant of Syracuse. It is said that Diogenes met Alexander the Great while he was in Corinth, and Alexander seems to have found Diogenes quite endearing. History has told many versions of their encounter, so it's impossible to pin down the events with any certainty. However, here is a reconstruction of how the conversation seems to have gone.
Greetings, I am Alexander, the Great King.
And I, Great King, am Diogenes the dog.
Tell me, Diogenes, why do they call you the dog?
Because I fawn on those who give me things, I bark at those who don't, and I bite the wicked.
Ha! And what might this Great King do for you, Diogenes the dog?
Perhaps you could just stand a little bit out of my sunlight.
Excellent. Everyone, if I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes.
And for my part, Alexander, if I were not Diogenes, I would also wish to be Diogenes.
Let me ask you something. Do you not fear me?
What do you mean, Great King? For are you good or evil?
I am good, of course.
Well then, who fears what is good? When it came to the end of Diogenes' life, he left the world as much the cynic as he had ever been. It is said that at around the age of 90, once he had had enough of living, Diogenes simply held his breath until he expired. But whatever the case may be, as a final point of reflection, we might ask what we can learn from the life of this great cynic. Well, we don't all have to live as dogs on the street to appreciate the light of Diogenes' lamp. He teaches us to make the most of a bad situation, to listen to our nature, and to not be overly concerned with social convention. And he shows us how to have the courage of our convictions, even when others do not take us seriously. When Diogenes was once told that people laugh at him, he replied, "Yet I am not laughed down." So, what do you think of Diogenes the Cynic? Was he really a Socrates gone mad? Or was he a Socrates as Socrates should have been? I hope you've enjoyed this video from Immaterial Minds. Please remember to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.